CEO bumps into a girl and falls in love at first sight, but finds out she is his new employee. The hot coffee dripped down Jason Morgan's white shirt like an ink stain on paper. His automatic reflexes made him take a step back, but it was too late, both for his Italian shirt and for the cream silk blouse of the woman in front of him. "Oh my God, I'm sorry." The words came out of both their mouths simultaneously, creating a synchronicity that would have been comical if it hadn't been for the gravity of the situation. In 15 minutes, Jason had to be on the 47th floor of the Morgan Stanley building in Manhattan for the most important presentation of his career as Chief Innovation Officer. The woman in front of him, with striking Asian features and a piercing gaze, was futilely trying to wipe her blouse with a tissue. Her visitor badge dangled around her neck, but Jason was too busy trying to save his own appearance to notice the name on it. This is really a disaster," she muttered, checking her Apple Watch. "I have a crucial meeting in a few minutes." "I do too," Jason replied, finally raising his eyes to face her properly. There was something familiar about his face, as if he had seen his picture somewhere recently. "I'm Jason Morgan, by the way, and I promise I don't usually attack people with coffee in the lobby." A small smile appeared on her lips. "Valerie Chun, and considering I was practically running while answering emails, I think I share the blame." The name hit Jason like a second hot coffee bath. Valerie Chun, the artificial intelligence expert his company had spent months trying to hire. The person he was due to present to the board in now 12 minutes. Are you Dr. Chin? From Berkeley?" he asked, feeling the cold sweat mix with the coffee on his shirt. Recognition also lit up her eyes. "And you're the Director of Innovation, who's supposed to introduce me to the board?" Fate had a peculiar sense of humor. There they were, two highly qualified professionals looking like they'd just come out of a coffee war, about to present a multi-million-dollar project that could revolutionize the predictive investment analysis market. "We have to do something," Jason said, pulling out his phone. He quickly dialed his assistant. "Amanda, I need 2 changes of clothes in my office in 5 minutes." "Yes, it's an emergency." "No, I can't explain right now." Valerie watched with a mixture of admiration and amusement. "Do you have extra clothes in the office?" "Not exactly," Jason replied, guiding her towards the elevators. "But I have an assistant who works miracles in a department store on the first floor of the building." In the elevator, the awkward silence was broken by a restrained laugh from Valerie. "You know, I spent all night rehearsing this performance, imagining every possible scenario that could go wrong. At no point did I consider a coffee bath as a prologue." Jason couldn't help but smile. There was something endearing about the way she was handling the situation. Consider in an unofficial initiation into the company. We're known for our memorable moments. On the 45th floor, Amanda was already waiting for them with 2 bags of clothes. His assistant's efficiency never failed to impress him. In record time, they both changed in their respective executive restrooms. When Valerie emerged wearing an elegant navy blue ensemble, Jason felt something other than professional relief. There was a magnetic force in her presence, a combination of sharp intelligence and natural charm that made her impossible to ignore. "Ready to impress the board?" she asked, adjusting her thin-framed glasses. "After this dramatic start, the presentation will seem like a piece of cake," Jason replied, trying to ignore how tailored his new gray suit looked. In the moments before they entered the meeting room, Jason realized that the coffee incident, chaotic as it had been, had broken down any initial formality between them. There was a non-verbal complicity, as if they shared an amusing secret. The performance was a resounding success. The chemistry between them was palpable, complementing each other perfectly as they explained the revolutionary potential of the new AI system. The directors were visibly impressed, not only with the project, but with the duo's natural synergy. After the meeting, as they celebrated with coffee, this time in mugs held securely on the table, Valerie looked at Jason curiously. "You know, when I accepted this position, I was worried about what it would be like to work with a new team. Now, after all this, I have the feeling it's going to be an interesting experience." Jason felt his heart speed up slightly. Interesting is a very polite word to describe spilling coffee on your new project manager on the first day. "Technically, you're not my boss," she corrected with a mischievous smile. "We're project partners." And speaking of partnerships, you owe me a silk blouse. And you owe me an Italian shirt, he retorted, realizing that he was blatantly flirting with someone who had just become a close colleague at work. Her smile widened. How about we settle this over lunch? Professional, of course. To discuss the next steps in the project. Professional, Jason repeated, knowing that they could both sense the underlying tension. Of course, totally professional. As they left the meeting room, Jason couldn't help thinking that that accidental meeting could be the start of something much bigger than a simple AI project. Sometimes the best beginnings come from the most chaotic moments, and a simple collision can completely alter the course of two lives. What started with spilled coffee was about to turn into a story far more complex and intriguing than either of them could have imagined. 3 days after the coffee incident, Jason found himself adjusting his tie for the third time while waiting for Valerie at Le Bernardin. The 3-star Michelin restaurant in the heart of Manhattan wasn't exactly what he had in mind when he suggested a professional lunch, but Valerie insisted that they needed to properly celebrate the board's unanimous approval of the project. Sorry I'm late. Valerie slid into the chair opposite him, her black hair slightly mussed by the autumn New York wind. Lexington Avenue traffic is impossible. Jason noticed that she had swapped her usual work glasses for contact lenses, further highlighting her expressive brown eyes. No problem. At least this time we're not covered in coffee. The sommelier approached with a wine list, and Valerie raised a provocative eyebrow. I think we can afford something more sophisticated than coffee today, don't you? Technically, it's still working hours, Jason replied, although he was already leafing through the wine list. Technically, we're celebrating a $50 million contract, she countered. I think we deserve a Bordeaux. Lunch flowed naturally, alternating between discussions about the AI project and personal conversations. Jason discovered that Valerie had grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who ran a small bookstore in the Chinatown neighborhood. Her interest in AI began when, as a teenager, she developed an algorithm to optimize the inventory system at her parents' store. "And you?" she asked, gently swirling her wine glass. "How did a kid from Boston end up as Chief Innovation Officer in Manhattan?" Jason smiled, surprised that she had looked into his past. "So you've been investigating me?" "Due diligence," she replied with a mischievous smile. "I needed to know who I was messing with after the coffee incident." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chef Eric Reipert, who knew Jason from other corporate events. As the renowned French chef personally recommended the dishes of the day, Jason noticed how Valerie maintained an elegant and professional posture, but her eyes sparkled with an almost childlike curiosity at the elaborate culinary descriptions. "You're looking at me," she commented after the chef had walked away. "I'm watching you," he corrected. "There's a difference." "And what would that be?" "Looking is casual. Observing requires attention to detail." Jason leaned slightly on the table. "For example, I've noticed that you remove your ring from your right middle finger when you're nervous and put it back on when you regain your confidence." Valerie unconsciously touched the ring in question, a delicate piece of jade which, she then explained, had belonged to her grandmother. "Impressive. Any other observations?" "A few," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "But I need to keep some mystery." Lunch lasted almost 3 hours, much longer than planned. When the bill arrived, they both reached for it simultaneously, their hands touching briefly on the soft leather of the bill holder. "I invited you," she insisted, "and I'm officially your main contact in the company," he countered. "Let me do the honors." "How about we split it?" she suggested. "That way we keep everything professional." The word professional hung between them like a transparent smokescreen, present, but not dense enough to obscure the obvious chemistry. As they left the restaurant, the fall afternoon in Manhattan welcomed them with a cool breeze and the city's characteristic buzz. Jason offered his blazer when he noticed Valerie shiver slightly. "You don't need it," she said, but accepted it anyway, wrapping herself in the fabric that was still warm and impregnated with his perfume. Walking side by side along 7th Avenue, they discussed the next steps in the project. The implementation of the AI system would begin next week, and they would have to work closely, very closely for the next few months. About that, Valerie stopped suddenly, turning to face him. "We need to establish some ground rules." "Ground rules?" Jason arched an eyebrow. Yes. Rules. She began to list them off on her fingers. First, no lunches in three-star Michelin restaurants. Second, we'll keep our relationship strictly professional. Third, he teased when she hesitated. Third, she continued with a restrained smile, we need to stop looking at each other the way we're looking at each other now. Jason felt his heart race. And how exactly are we looking at each other? As if we wanted to break all the rules I've just laid down. The moment was interrupted by the ring of Valerie's cell phone, an urgent message from the development team. The bubble of intimacy shattered. In corporate reality took hold once again. I need to get back to the office, she said, already removing his blazer. We have a video conference with the Berkeley team in half an hour. I'll accompany you, Jason offered. I also need to review some contracts before the meeting. In the office elevator, alone and in silence, the tension between them was almost palpable. When the doors opened on the 47th floor, Valerie turned to him. About those rules, yes. Maybe we can negotiate them, she said with an enigmatic smile before stepping out of the elevator, leaving Jason with a silly grin on his face and a certainty that the next few months would be far more interesting than any AI project could ever be. The meeting room on the 47th floor was buzzing with energy on Monday morning. A week had passed since lunch at Le Bernardin, and Jason watched Valerie lead the first official presentation of the project to the development team. Her red blazer contrasted with the predominant gray of the office, just as her dynamic presence stood out in the traditional corporate environment. The algorithm we developed in Berkeley, she explained, gesturing to the complex diagram on the screen, not only predicts market trends, but learns from the emotional nuances of investors. This is where our approach differs from the competition. Jason realized that he wasn't the only one mesmerized by his presentation. The entire team of 20 developers was absorbing every word with absolute attention. Valerie had the rare gift of making complex AI concepts accessible without losing technical depth. Any questions? She concluded, adjusting her glasses with that characteristic gesture that Jason had already memorized. Marcus Wheeler, a veteran developer known for his skepticism, raised his hand. Dr. Chen, with all due respect, implementing real-time sentiment analysis for millions of simultaneous transactions seems impossible, Valerie added with a confident smile. Quickly, her fingers danced across the laptop keyboard, projecting a series of codes onto the screen. Let me show you something. Over the next 10 minutes, she methodically dismantled Marcus' every technical objection, turning the team's staunchest skeptic into an outspoken admirer. Jason felt a surge of pride, and something else he shouldn't feel for a co-worker. After the meeting, as the room emptied, Valerie remained organizing her notes. Jason closed the door, creating a moment of privacy. You've just won over Marcus Wheeler, he commented. Do you know how many years it took me to do that? Let me guess, she smiled, without looking away from her papers. 3 years, 2 months, and about 15 days? Jason blinked, surprised. How? I did my homework, she explained, finally looking up at him. I read all the previous project reports. Marcus always records his objections with a precise date and time. The pattern was interesting. You're frighteningly detailed. That's why they hired me, isn't it? She started to walk towards the door, but stopped inches from Jason. By the way, those rules we established. Yes, he felt his heart racing at the proximity. We're breaking the third one right now. Before Jason could reply, Amanda abruptly opened the door. Mr. Morgan, the CEO, is on the line. It's about the leak. Leak? Valerie asked, immediately alert. Jason already had the phone to his ear, his expression changing as he listened. When he hung up, his face was tense. We have a problem. Someone has leaked details of our algorithm to the press. The Wall Street Journal is going to publish a story tomorrow. The blood drained from Valerie's face. That's impossible. The code is on an isolated server with security protocols that I developed myself. The leak wasn't technical, Jason explained, running a hand through his hair in frustration. It was conceptual details of the project. Someone on the inside said more than they should have. The next few moments were a whirlwind of activity. A task force was quickly set up in the crisis room on the executive floor. While the PR team worked on official releases, Valerie and Jason reviewed every document, every email, every presentation that could have been the source of the leak. Here, Valerie pointed her laptop at 11 p.m., when only the two of them remained in the office. Today's presentation. Did you notice how Marcus asked very specific questions about points that weren't on the slide? Jason leaned over his shoulder, his discreet perfume momentarily distracting him from the chaos. Do you think I'm not accusing anyone, she interrupted, rubbing her tired eyes. But we need to map everyone who has had access to sensitive information in the last few weeks. Including both of us, Jason added, leaning back in his chair, which means we need to be prepared for internal interrogations. Valerie tensed. That could complicate things. What things? You know, she gestured vaguely between them. Our professional dynamic. Our professional dynamic, Jason repeated slowly, a wry smile forming on his lips despite the seriousness of the situation. Is that what we're calling it? What should we call it? Before he could answer, Valerie's cell phone vibrated. A preview of the Wall Street Journal article had just arrived in her email. As they read it together, their shoulders touching lightly in close proximity, the gravity of the situation became even clearer. They have specific details about neural architecture, Valerie murmured, her voice trembling slightly. Jason, this isn't just a superficial leak. Someone had access to the heart of the project. And that someone knew exactly what to look for, he added, his mind already calculating the implications. Which means that we have a very well-informed spy in our midst, she concluded. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken possibilities. At that moment, alone in the office at midnight, with Manhattan shining through the windows on the 47th floor, Jason and Valerie realized that their professional and personal challenges had just become dangerously intertwined. We need to trust each other, Valerie finally said, her voice low but firm. Completely. Without reservation. Jason nodded, aware that trust completely meant much more than just professional loyalty. Without reservation, he agreed, holding her gaze. The air between them was heavy with unspoken promises and rules about to be broken. But with a corporate spy on the loose and millions of dollars at stake, the most important code of conduct now was survival. The day dawned with Wall Street Journal headlines splashing the leak all over Manhattan. Jason had barely slept, spending the night alternating between phone calls with the legal team and messages with Valerie, who was immersed in a forensic analysis of the system logs. Coffee? Amanda offered, entering his office with a steaming cup. You look like you need something stronger than usual. Thanks, he replied, noticing that his assistant seemed especially tense. Is there a problem, Amanda? She hesitated for a moment. Mr. Morgan, Jason, there's something you need to know. Last night, after everyone had left, I saw Marcus Wheeler coming back into the office. He was using the computer in the development room. Jason sat up straighter. What time? Around 10 p.m. I thought it was strange because he never stays late. Before Jason could answer, Valerie burst through the door, her normally impeccable hair slightly disheveled. I found something, she announced, stopping when she noticed Amanda. Oh, sorry, I should have knocked. No, stay. Jason gestured for her to enter. Amanda just brought me some interesting information about Marcus. As Valerie settled in, Amanda discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her. In the silence that followed, Jason observed how Valerie looked simultaneously exhausted and electrified. What did you find out? He asked. Valerie connected her laptop to the screen on the wall. In the last 3 days, there have been anomalous accesses to the development server. Someone was using administrative credentials to extract data at unusual times. Like 10 p.m. yesterday? Jason added. Her eyes went wide. How did you? Jason reported what Amanda had just told him. Valerie began typing furiously, correlating times and hits. That explains the pattern, but there's something that doesn't make sense. The accesses required in-depth knowledge not only of our system, but also of the original Berkeley project. And Marcus didn't have that knowledge, Jason concluded, beginning to understand. He's good, but not at that level. Exactly, which means he's not working alone. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of this discovery settled in. Jason stood up, walking over to the window that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. The city seemed unperturbed below, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the 47th floor. "We need to be careful," he finally said. "If Marcus has an accomplice, any false move could alert them." Valerie approached, stopping beside him. "Jason, there's one more thing. The hits, some of them came from an IP I recognize. It's from Berkeley." His heart raced. "Someone from your old lab?" "Possibly. And that means," she paused, her voice trembling slightly, "that maybe I inadvertently brought the problem with me." Jason turned to face her, noticing the guilt in her eyes. "Hey," he said softly, resisting the urge to touch her face. "This isn't your fault, isn't it? I should have realized. I should have been more cautious when transferring the project." At that moment, a knock on the door interrupted them. It was Marcus Wheeler. "May I come in?" he asked, his tone far too casual for someone who was potentially at the center of a corporate conspiracy. Jason and Valerie exchanged a quick glance before he replied, "Of course, Marcus. What can we do for you?" Marcus entered, carrying a briefcase. "I was reviewing some code last night and found some inconsistencies that I'd like to discuss with Dr. Chen." "Last night?" Valerie repeated, her voice perfectly controlled. "Interesting. At what time exactly?" A flash of something, nervousness, guilt, flashed through Marcus's eyes. "Around 9 p.m., I think." "Curious," Jason commented casually. "Considering Amanda saw you here at 10 p.m., the silence that followed was deafening." Marcus looked from Jason to Valerie, his expression changing subtly. "Look, it's not what you're thinking." "And what exactly are we thinking, Marcus?" Valerie asked, her voice now carrying an authority that made Marcus visibly recoil. I can explain, but not here. Not now." "I think now is the perfect time," Jason insisted, his voice firm. "And you're going to tell us exactly who in Berkeley you've been in contact with." Marcus's face paled. "How do you IP tracking?" Valerie explained. "Too basic for someone your level, Marcus." "Which suggests that you wanted to be discovered." A subtle transformation took place in Marcus' posture. His shoulders relaxed and a wry smile appeared on his lips. "I always knew you were brilliant, Dr. Chen. That's why they're so interested in you." "They?" Jason stepped forward protectively. "Quantum analytics," Marcus replied simply. "They came to me 3 months ago. They offered a lot of money, but what they really wanted was access to your work, Dr. Chen, especially after they found out you were bringing the project here." Valerie staggered slightly, and Jason instinctively took her by the elbow. Quantum analytics was their main competitor in the financial AI field, known for its aggressive recruiting and technology acquisition tactics. "Why are you telling us this now?" Jason asked, still holding Valerie. Marcus sighed deeply. "Because I realized I was wrong. The leak to the newspaper, it wasn't me. They acted without my knowledge. They crossed a line I wasn't willing to cross." Marcus' confession triggered a cascade of events. In less than an hour, the 47th floor crisis room was transformed into a makeshift command center, with the legal team, senior executives, and cybersecurity experts converging to deal with the crisis. "We need every detail of your contacts with quantum analytics," demanded Catherine Martinez, the ruthless head of the legal department, her heels echoing across the floor as she circled around Marcus. "Every email, every phone call, every meeting." Jason watched the interrogation from the far end of the room, aware of the tension emanating from Valerie beside him. She hadn't said a word since Marcus' revelation, her fingers typing furiously on her laptop, tracking access patterns and possible vulnerabilities. "They approached me first at a conference in Seattle," Marcus explained, his former confidence replaced by palpable anxiety. "Sarah Winters, their recruitment director. She said she'd been following my work in machine learning." "Sarah Winters?" Valerie interrupted abruptly, her fingers freezing on the keyboard. "Brunette, about 40, discreet scar near her left eye?" Marcus nodded, surprised. "You know her? She tried to recruit me in Berkeley 3 times." Valerie closed her laptop with a decisive click. And now it all makes sense. They didn't just want a project, they wanted the whole team. Jason felt a shiver run down his spine. Quantum analytics wasn't just trying to steal technology. It was executing an elaborate long-term strategy to dismantle his operation from the inside. "Marcus," Jason approached, his voice controlled but firm, I need to know exactly what you gave them. Just general architectural specifications, Marcus replied, running a hand over his tired face. But they wanted more, much more, especially after Dr. Chan arrived with the core of the Berkeley system. Catherine gestured to her assistant. Prepare the documents for an immediate lawsuit. We're suing Quantum for corporate espionage. No, Valerie intervened, surprising everyone. That's exactly what they want. What do you mean? Jason turned to her, puzzled. A lawsuit would make the details of the project public, she explained, getting up and walking over to the whiteboard. Quantum doesn't want to steal our code. They want to force us to reveal our methodology through legal channels. A murmur of understanding ran through the room. It was a brilliant strategy in its simplicity. Force them into a legal battle that, regardless of the outcome, would expose the secrets they were trying to protect. So, what's the plan? Catherine asked, her expression divided between admiration and concern. Valerie looked directly at Jason, a spark of determination in her eyes. We're going to give them exactly what they want, or at least what they think they want. A Trojan horse, Jason added, beginning to understand. A slow smile spread across his face. You want to plant false information? Not just false, Valerie corrected, a cunning glint in her eye. Convincing enough for them to invest millions developing a solution that will never work. Marcus straightened up in his chair. I can help with that. I still have the communication channel with them open. It's risky, Catherine warned. If they find out, that's why we need to make this look like an unintentional leak, Jason interrupted, already formulating the plan in his mind. Marcus will continue his role as an informant, but under our guidance. The next few hours were dedicated to working out every detail of the counterintelligence. Valerie led the creation of a system architecture that seemed revolutionary on the surface, but contained subtle flaws that would only become apparent after months of development. This is brilliant, Marcus muttered, reviewing the forged code. They'll never notice the errors until it's too late. As the team worked, Jason couldn't help but admire how Valerie had turned a potentially devastating crisis into a strategic opportunity. She was in her element, coordinating multiple work fronts with almost surgical precision. At around 2 a.m., when most of the team had already left, Jason found Valerie alone in the conference room, reviewing lines of code with tired eyes. You need to rest, he said softly, placing a cup of green tea next to her. I can't, she replied without taking her eyes off the screen. Every detail needs to be perfect. Quantum has some of the best engineers in the industry. And we have you. Jason sat down next to her, gently closing the laptop screen. Who, by the way, needs to be functional tomorrow to coordinate this whole operation. Valerie finally looked up at him, an exhausted smile on her lips. You know what's ironic? When I took this job, I thought the biggest challenge would be to keep our situation under control. And now we're planning a counterintelligence operation worthy of a spy movie, Jason added, aware of the closeness between them. Life has an interesting sense of humor, she murmured, her gaze lingering on his for a moment longer than necessary. The silence that followed was full of unspoken possibilities. In the midst of the chaos of the last few days, something had changed between them. The initial tension had turned into a deep partnership based on mutual trust and admiration. Valerie, Jason began, his voice low. When this is all over? No, she interrupted him gently, placing a finger over his lips. Not now. First, we'll win this battle. Then, an enigmatic smile crossed her face. We can discuss all those rules we've established. Jason nodded, respecting her decision, but keeping the promise implicit in her words. For now, they had a mission to accomplish and a dangerous game to play. The rest, all the glances, accidental touches, and tension-filled moments, would have to wait. The counterintelligence strategy went into action the next morning. Jason watched from his living room as Marcus conducted a seemingly casual phone conversation with Sarah Winners of Quantum Analytics, accidentally leaking details about a supposedly critical system upgrade. They took the bait, Marcus announced after hanging up, his face a mixture of relief and tension. Sarah practically salivated when I mentioned the new machine learning parameters. Valerie, who had spent the whole night refining the fake code, just nodded, her eyes fixed on the computer screen where she monitored accesses to the server. She had created a kind of walled garden, a controlled environment where quantum could steal exactly what they wanted stolen. How long do you think it will take them to figure it out? Jason asked, pouring each of us a cup of coffee. If we've done our job properly, Valerie replied, accepting the cup with a tired smile. About 6 months. Enough time to invest millions in development and infrastructure. The plan was elegant in its complexity. The fake code would work perfectly in smaller tests, but would start to show subtle flaws when implemented on a large scale. It was like building a house with a foundation that seemed solid, but would slowly reveal irreparable cracks. People. Amanda burst into the room, her normally composed face showing signs of concern. Quantum has just scheduled a meeting with the board for tomorrow. They're proposing a merger. Jason's coffee nearly fell out of his hand. A merger? Doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, Valerie interrupted, standing up abruptly. It's brilliant, really. If they can't steal the technology, they'll try to buy the whole company. The room sank into a tense silence as the implications of this new move were established. A merger would mean complete access to all the source code, all the research, all the intellectual property they were trying to protect. We need to adapt the plan, Jason declared, his mind already processing different scenarios. Marcus, continue your role as an informant. The more they believe they have a secret advantage, the less aggressive the merger proposal will be. Valerie began walking around the room, a habit Jason had noticed appearing whenever she was deeply concentrated. We can use this to our advantage. If they believe they already have access to the secrets through Marcus, the merger offer will be lower. And when they find out that the code is a fake, Jason continued, it'll be too late, she added, her eyes meeting his with that spark of complicity that was becoming more and more frequent. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. While the legal team prepared the defense against the hostile takeover attempt, Valerie and Jason worked on further refining the counterintelligence plan. You need to be at the board meeting tomorrow, Jason insisted as they reviewed documents late into the night. No one knows the system better than you. Valerie hesitated, biting her lower lip, a gesture Jason had learned to associate with her anxiety. I don't know, Jason. Sarah Winters knows me. If she sees me there, that's exactly why you need to be there, he argued, unconsciously moving closer to her. Your presence will make them uncomfortable, make them question whether they really have any advantage. The air between them was charged with that familiar, unresolved tension. They were alone in the office, Manhattan shining through the windows like a sea of artificial stars. Do you trust me? He asked softly. You know I do, she replied, her voice just as low. It's me I don't trust completely right now. What do you mean? Valerie stood up, walking over to the window. Jason, if something goes wrong tomorrow, if Quantum gets the merger, it will all be my fault. My project, my research, my old contacts at Berkeley. Jason moved to stand next to her, resisting the urge to touch her. Hey, look at me, he asked gently. When she turned, he continued, You're not responsible for their actions. In fact, you're the only reason we still have a chance of winning this. A small smile appeared on her lips. You're dangerously good at saying the right thing. It's a gift, he joked, relieved to see some of the tension leave her shoulders. Now, how about we order something to eat? I can't have you fainting from hunger during tomorrow's meeting. Chinese food, she suggested, reaching for a phone. Let me guess. You know the best place in Manhattan for dim sum at. He checked his watch, 11:47? Actually, she smiled, that smile that always made his heart race. I know a Chinese chef who owes my father a favor. He makes special deliveries for special clients. While they waited for their food, they continued to refine their strategy for the next day, but there was something different in the air. Perhaps it was the late hour, where the tension of the situation was simply the accumulation of all those unresolved moments between them, but every glance seemed to last a second longer. Every movement seemed to bring them a little closer together. The corporate battle they would face the next morning loomed over them like an approaching storm. But in that moment, in the silence of the night office, Jason and Valerie found a moment of peace in each other's presence, strengthening a partnership that went far beyond the professional. Even if they weren't yet ready to admit it out loud, the boardroom on the 50th floor emanated tension the next morning. Jason watched as the quantum analytics executive settled down on the opposite side of the solemn mahogany table, Sarah Winters among them, her calculating gaze assessing every face present. "Ladies and gentlemen," began Richard Davidson, Quantum CEO, his soft voice masking the aggressiveness of the proposal he was about to present. "We are here to discuss a unique opportunity for synergy between our companies." Valerie, sitting to Jason's right, maintained impeccable posture, but he could feel the tension in her shoulders. Under the table, her fingers typed discreetly on a tablet, monitoring Quantum's attempts to access her servers in real time. "Our merger proposal," Davidson continued, projecting elaborate graphs onto the screen, "values our operations at $2.8 billion. A generous offer, considering the recent vulnerabilities in your security systems." The veiled threat hung in the air like smoke. Jason noticed Sarah Winters studying Valerie's reaction, looking for signs of weakness. Instead, he found a serene smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Interesting your mention of vulnerabilities." Valerie spoke for the first time, her voice clear and controlled, "especially considering the recent unauthorized accesses originating from Quantum servers." A flash of surprise crossed Sarah's face. She hadn't expected them to have traced the hacking attempts back to their source. "Dr. Chen," Sarah quickly regained her composure. "Always a pleasure to see you again. I'm still sorry you turned down our offer in Berkeley." "Sometimes the best offer isn't the highest," Valerie replied, her fingers continuing their silent work under the table. Jason intervened, maintaining the momentum. "Mr. Davidson, your proposal is interesting, but we have some concerns about the real motivation behind it." "Concerns?" Davidson arched a perfectly trimmed eyebrow. "Yes," Jason continued, sliding a folder across the table. "For example, these records of systematic attempts at industrial espionage over the last 3 months." Davidson's face remained impassive, but his hands betrayed his tension as he lightly squeezed the edge of the table. "Serious charges require substantial evidence, Mr. Morgan." It was at this moment that Valerie's tablet emitted a silent notification. Her face lit up with a smile that Jason had learned to associate with imminent victory. "Speaking of evidence," she interrupted softly, "would you like to explain why your teams are trying to implement our algorithm at this very moment?" Sarah Winters visibly paled. Davidson cast a cutting glance in her direction. "Actually," Valerie continued, projecting a screen of code onto the wall, "I can show you in real time how your engineers are trying to integrate a code that, I must admit, we planted specifically for you." The silence that followed was deafening. Jason watched in awe as Valerie navigated through different layers of code, methodically exposing Quantum's every attempt to steal his technology. "Impressive, isn't it?" Jason commented casually. "How seemingly perfect code can contain flaws so subtle that they only become evident after millions have been invested in their implementation." Davidson stood up abruptly, his face red with restrained fury. "This is absurd. We came here with a legitimate business proposal." "No, you came here because you realized that your initial plan failed," Valerie corrected, her voice still maintaining the calculated calm. "And now you're desperate to legitimately acquire what you couldn't steal." Sarah Winters also stood up, but her movement was interrupted when the doors to the room opened, revealing FBI agents. "Ms. Winters," the lead agent announced, "we have some questions about your recent activities in Berkeley." The chaos that followed was almost cinematic. As the Quantum executives were escorted out of the room, Jason and Valerie remained seated, watching their strategy unfold perfectly. "You knew," Jason murmured to her. "From the beginning, you knew they'd try the merger." "Let's just say I know Sarah Winters better than she thinks I do," Valerie replied, finally allowing her posture to relax. At Berkeley, she always preferred the more aggressive route. The next few hours were devoted to testimony and documentation. When they finally got a moment of privacy, it was already evening. Jason found Valerie on the roof of the building, gazing out at the lights of Manhattan. "So," he began, stopping next to her, "I guess those rules we established at the beginning seem a bit irrelevant now," she added, a smile playing on her lips. "I was going to say obsolete, but irrelevant will do just as well." Valerie turned to face him, the night breeze playing with her hair. "You know what's funny? When I took this job, My biggest fear was getting too involved, losing my objectivity. And now I realize that it was precisely our involvement that allowed us to win this battle. She took a step towards him. The trust we developed, the way we complimented each other. Jason felt his heart race. After weeks of unresolved tension, stolen glances, and accidental touches, they were finally having this conversation. "So," he said softly, "what do we do now?" "Well," she smiled, that smile that always left him breathless. "I think first we need to discuss that lunch you owe me. And then," he teased, narrowing the distance between them even more. "Then," she whispered, "we can rewrite all those rules." The lights of Manhattan bore silent witness as the space between them finally disappeared, marking not just the end of a corporate battle, but the beginning of something much more significant. The victory over quantum analytics brought a wave of change to the office. In the weeks that followed, Jason and Valerie became the center of attention not only within the company, but throughout the financial sector. The Wall Street Journal, which had previously published the leak, now ran headlines about how a brilliant duo had dismantled one of the biggest corporate espionage attempts of the decade. "Have you seen this?" Valerie asked one morning, sliding the latest issue of Forbes across Jason's desk. The cover showed a photo of them on the roof of the building, Manhattan in the background, with the headline, "The Power of Silicon Valley Meets Wall Street. How an Unlikely Partnership Revolutionized Corporate Security." "Great," Jason groaned, flipping through the magazine. "Now everyone will want to know about the coffee incident." "Actually," Valerie smiled, taking a seat on the edge of her desk, "they seem more interested in our natural chemistry and unique professional dynamic." She made quotation marks in the air, quoting directly from the article. Their relationship had developed over the last few days, but they both kept a professional low profile in the office. Even so, the glances and smiles they exchanged did not go unnoticed by the team. "Mr. Morgan," Amanda interrupted, hurrying into the room, "the board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon." Jason and Valerie exchanged worried glances. After the incident with Quantum, the board had been surprisingly quiet. "What's the agenda?" Jason asked. "Departmental restructuring," Amanda replied, consulting her tablet. Discussion of interpersonal relationship policies in the workplace." The silence that followed was heavy. Valerie slowly rose from the table, her expression tightening. "It was inevitable," she muttered. "With all this media exposure." "Hey," Jason stood up, closing the door after Amanda left. "We didn't do anything wrong. We saved the company from a hostile takeover, protected vital intellectual property. And we fell in love in the process," Valerie added softly, the vulnerability in her voice making Jason's heart squeeze. Before he could reply, his phone vibrated, a message from Marcus. "You need to see this," it said, followed by a link to a technology blog. The article detailed how Quantum Analytics was suing its own former employee, Sarah Winters, claiming that she had acted without corporate authorization. It was an obvious attempt to distance herself from the scandal, but there was one detail that made Valerie turn pale. "They mentioned Berkeley," she pointed to the screen, "and they suggest that I had prior knowledge of Sarah's activities before I took this job." "That's ridiculous," Jason protested, but Valerie was already in analytical mode. "It's brilliant, actually," she said, starting to pace around the room. "They can't have our technology, so they're trying to discredit the source. If they manage to create doubts about my integrity, I'm not going to let that happen," Jason declared firmly, holding out his arms to interrupt her agitated pacing. "We have all the evidence, remember?" The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Catherine Martinez, the head of legal, with a serious expression. "We need to talk," she announced, entering the room. "The situation is more complicated than we imagined." Over the next 2 hours, Catherine detailed how Quantum was building an elaborate case. They claimed that Valerie had used inside knowledge of Berkeley to create a trap for Sarah Winters, essentially provoking the espionage attempt to discredit the competition. "It's a ridiculous story," Jason argued, "but ingenious enough to create doubt. And doubts are all they need," Valerie added, her voice laced with frustration. "If they manage to tarnish my reputation, the whole project is compromised." Catherine consulted her notes. This afternoon's board meeting isn't just about relationship policies. They're going to discuss the possibility of suspending the project until this situation is resolved. No. Jason and Valerie exclaimed simultaneously. The project is at a crucial stage, Valerie explained. Interrupting it now would be catastrophic for the development of the algorithm. Jason could see the gears turning in her mind, their familiar expression of resolution forming on her face. I have an idea, she finally announced. But you won't like it. Why won't I like it? Jason asked, already feeling a tightness in his chest. Because, she took a deep breath, I had to go back to Berkeley. Temporarily. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine looked between the two of them, clearly aware of the personal tension behind a professional decision. It's the only way, Valerie continued. I need to clear my name at the source. Berkeley has all the records of my research, of Sarah's recruitment attempts, everything. If I can prove that there was no prior connection, I'll go with you, Jason declared impulsively. You can't, Catherine intervened. We need you here to keep the board calm and the project moving forward. Besides, she hesitated, given the circumstances, it might be best for you to keep some distance for the time being. The pain in Valerie's eyes was palpable, but Jason recognized the determination behind it. It was the same determination that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. How long? He asked softly. 2 weeks at the most, Valerie replied, although they both knew it could take longer. Enough time to gather the necessary documentation and present our case. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations and meetings. The board, surprisingly, supported Valerie's decision to go to Berkeley, seeing it as a demonstration of proactivity in resolving the situation. In the evening, Jason found her in the same place where they had sealed their relationship days before, the roof of the building. You know what's ironic? She said as he approached. Our first kiss here was after we won a battle. And now we're about to face another, he added, stopping beside her. But this time apart, temporarily, she emphasized, turning to face him. And this time, when I get back, we won't have to hide anything. Jason smiled, even though his heart was heavy. Do you promise to keep me updated? About everything? Only if you promise not to let Marcus tamper with my code while I'm away, she joked, trying to lighten the moment. Instead of answering, Jason pulled her into a kiss, letting all the unspoken words flow through the gesture. When they broke apart, Valerie rested her forehead against his chest. "I'm gonna miss you," she murmured. "You'd better," he replied, making her laugh softly. "After all, you still owe me a coffee." The moment was interrupted by the sound of his phone. The driver had arrived to take her to the airport. As he watched her go, Jason couldn't help thinking that sometimes the greatest victories require the most difficult sacrifices. 2 weeks turned into 3, and Jason found that the silence on the 47th floor was deafening without Valerie. Nightly video calls between Manhattan and Berkeley became his new normal, although the digital connection was barely a substitute for the energy she brought to the room. "I found something," Valerie announced during one of these calls, her eyes shining with that familiar intensity that always preceded an important discovery. "Sarah's records at Berkeley go far beyond what we imagined." Jason shifted in his chair, conscious of the late hour in New York. "What kind of records?" "Apparently, she was building a profile of me long before I considered leaving Berkeley. Emails, research records, even my lab access patterns." Valerie ran a hand through her hair, a gesture that Jason had learned to associate with his pin-up frustration. "She was studying me, Jason, like a predator studies its prey." "That may be exactly what we need," he replied, his mind already calculating the implications. "It proves that Quantum had a premeditated plan." "There's more," Valerie continued, her image flickering slightly on the screen. "I found records of suspicious bank transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. And guess who authorized the payments?" "Richard Davidson," Jason added, remembering the Quantum CEO who had led the merger attempt. "Exactly. Sarah wasn't an independent agent. She was following direct orders from the top." The revelation hung between them, separated by 3,000 miles, but united in purpose. Jason could see the tiredness in Valerie's eyes, the sleepless nights evident on her normally radiant face. "You need to rest," he said softly. "I can't," she replied, an echo of the conversation in the penthouse before her departure. "I'm so close, Jason. A few more days, and I'll have everything documented. Valerie, and how's the project going? She interrupted, clearly trying to change the subject. Is Marcus keeping his hands off my code? Jason smiled, allowing the change. Actually, he's been surprisingly helpful. He discovered an interesting optimization in the parallel processing module. Let me see, she demanded, immediately alert. The next few minutes were dedicated to technical discussions. Codes shared via screens, as if physical distance could be compensated for by intellectual proximity. It was in these moments that Jason missed her most. The way she would get excited about an elegant algorithm, the way her eyes would light up when solving a particularly challenging problem. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on Jason's office door. It was Catherine Martinez, carrying a grave expression that he was beginning to hate. "Jason, we need to talk," she said, noticing Valerie on the screen. "Oh great, you're here too, Valerie. Quantum has just made another move." "What kind of move?" Valerie asked, her voice tense. "They're claiming that you hacked their systems during the implementation of the fake code. They're threatening to present evidence of unauthorized access." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Jason watched Valerie's face go through a series of emotions before settling into an iron determination. "They're bluffing," she declared. "Every access we've made has been carefully documented and authorized by Marcus himself as part of our counterintelligence operation." "It doesn't matter," Catherine replied. "They're trying to turn our defense into an attack. And it's working. The press is already speculating." Jason felt his stomach sink. "How much time do we have?" "They're going to present the supposed evidence at a press conference on Thursday," Catherine replied. 3 days. Enough time," Valerie muttered, more to herself than to the others. "Enough time for what?" Jason asked, not liking the tone in her voice. "To end this once and for all," she replied, her eyes meeting his through the screen. "Jason, remember when you said you trusted me completely?" "Valerie, what are you planning?" "I have to go," she said abruptly. "Catherine, keep the legal department ready." "Jason, trust me." The screen went black before he could protest. Catherine looked at him with a mixture of concern and sympathy. "She's going to do something reckless, isn't she?" she asked. "Probably," Jason replied, already reaching for his phone. "Amanda, I need the first flight to San Francisco. Now." The next few hours were a blur of preparations and anxiety. During the transcontinental flight, Jason couldn't stop thinking about the determined look in Valerie's eyes, the same look he had seen when she had faced Quantum's board of directors. When his plane landed in San Francisco, a message awaited him. "Don't come to campus. Meet me in Golden Gate Park at 3 p.m. Bring Catherine via video call." The park was surprisingly quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. Jason found Valerie sitting on a bench near the Conservatory of Flowers, her laptop open and an expression of triumph on her face. "You shouldn't have come," she said when he approached, although her smile betrayed her pleasure at seeing him. "As if I could stay in New York after that dramatic exit of yours," he replied, taking a seat next to her. "What did you find out?" In response, she turned her laptop towards him. On the screen, a series of emails and documents told a devastating story of corporate conspiracy, far beyond what they had initially imagined. "Quantum wasn't just after our project," she explained, her eyes shining with that familiar intensity. "They were trying to replicate years of research into artificial intelligence, not just by me, but by the entire academic community." The afternoon San Francisco sun bathed Golden Gate Park as Jason absorbed Valerie's revelations. On his laptop, a complex web of evidence was unfolding, connecting quantum analytics to a conspiracy far greater than any of them had imagined. "Look at this." Valerie pointed to a series of encrypted emails she had managed to decipher. "Davidson wasn't just trying to steal our technology. He was building an information cartel, co-opting researchers from various universities, buying confidential data. An AI monopoly," Jason muttered, beginning to understand the magnitude of the situation. Over the video call, Catherine Martinez was equally stunned. "This goes beyond corporate espionage," the lawyer declared. "We're talking about antitrust violations on a federal scale." Valerie nodded, her fingers dancing over the keyboard as she opened more documents. Their plan was simple and brutal. to acquire or destroy any company or researcher that didn't submit to their control. I was just another target on a very long list. How did you get all this? Jason asked, still amazed at the amount of evidence. An enigmatic smile crossed Valerie's lips. Remember when they claimed that I had hacked their systems? Well, technically I hadn't until they made that accusation. It was the perfect pretext for further investigation. You deliberately provoked them, Jason realized, torn between admiration and concern. I knew they would try to discredit me, she explained, so I created a trap within the trap. Every attempt they made to attack me only opened more doors for their internal operations. Catherine interrupted via video call. That's brilliant, but also extremely risky. If they find out, they already have, Valerie replied calmly. In fact, they're probably panicking right now. About an hour ago, I sent copies of all this evidence to the FBI, SEC, and major press outlets. Jason felt his heart race. Without consulting anyone? I couldn't risk it, she replied, finally allowing a little vulnerability to seep through her professional facade. The more people who knew, the greater the risk of a leak. Besides, she hesitated, looking directly at Jason, I didn't want to involve you. If something went wrong, I needed to make sure you were protected. Valerie, he began, but was interrupted by the sound of notifications going off on their phones. The first headlines were already starting to appear. Scandal at Quantum Analytics, CEO involved in global espionage scheme, screamed the Wall Street Journal. AI cartel discovered in Wall Street, announced the New York Times. My God, Catherine muttered through the screen. This is going to cause an earthquake in the market. It already is, Jason observed, checking the real-time quotes. Quantum shares were in free fall. Valerie closed her laptop, finally allowing her shoulders to relax. It's over, she said softly. It really is. Jason reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. You're absolutely incredible. You know that? And absolutely exhausted, she admitted with a small smile. I haven't slept properly in days. Catherine sniffled through the video call. Well, all things considered, I think I can inform the board that our concerns about conflicts of interest are insignificant compared to the storm to come. I'll start preparing our official communiques. After the call ended, Jason and Valerie remained seated on the park bench, watching the sun begin to set over San Francisco. The conservatory of flowers cast long shadows over the lawn, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of nearby roses. So, Jason broke the comfortable silence. What happens now? Valerie turned to face him, her eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and contentment. Well, first I need to sleep for about 3 days. Then we have a revolutionary AI project to finish. And she hesitated, a smile playing on her lips. I think you still owe me a coffee. A coffee, he laughed. After dismantling a corporate cartel and saving the AI industry, all you want is a coffee. With you? Yes, she replied simply. After all, that's how it all started, isn't it? Jason smiled, remembering the first clumsy encounter in the building lobby. You know, for someone so brilliant at predicting patterns with AI, you didn't see that collision coming. Maybe I did, she teased. Maybe the whole coffee shop incident was an elaborate strategy on my part. Now you're scaring me, he joked, pulling her closer. Valerie's phone vibrated. Another news notification. Davidson had resigned as CEO of Quantum. The empire he had built through manipulation and espionage was crumbling in a matter of hours. It's strange, Valerie reflected, how something that started with spilled coffee ended up changing the entire technology landscape on Wall Street. And a few corporate rules in the process, Jason added. Some rules deserve to be broken, she replied, leaning in to kiss him, no longer caring who could see. As the sun set over San Francisco, tinting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jason realized that sometimes the best stories start with an apparent disaster. A spilled coffee, an unlikely encounter, and the courage to break a few rules along the way. Sometimes that's all it takes to change not just 2 lives, but an entire industry. So, he murmured against her lips, about that coffee. Tomorrow, she smiled. Today, just stay here with me. And he stayed, as the first stars began to appear over Golden Gate Park, knowing that some collisions are simply destined to happen.